She laughed during our fight. What? Are you going to break up with me? Don't be so dramatic. I didn't say a word. I just walked to the closet and pulled out a suitcase. Her laughter turned to tears when she saw it was already packed with her things. 32M, never thought I'd be the type of person to plan something like this. But sometimes life pushes you into corners you never expected to find yourself in. The morning everything changed started like any other Wednesday. She was standing in our kitchen, coffee in hand, scrolling through her phone with that familiar smirk I'd grown to despise. I was making breakfast, trying to salvage what little normalcy remained in our relationship, when she dropped the bomb about dinner with her college friends that evening. The same friends she'd been mysteriously reconnecting with lately. The same friends whose names never seemed to stick when I asked about them. I suggested we do something together instead, maybe try that new restaurant downtown we'd talked about months ago. Her response was immediate and cutting. She told me I was being clingy and pathetic, that she needed space to breathe, and that I should find my own entertainment instead of depending on her for everything. The words hit harder than usual because they weren't entirely wrong. I had been trying harder lately, attempting to bridge whatever gap had formed between us. But her tone, the casual cruelty in it, made something inside me snap. I told her I thought we should talk about where our relationship was heading. She laughed, not the warm laugh I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago, but something cold and dismissive. She said I was being dramatic again, always making mountains out of molehills, always trying to turn every conversation into some deep, meaningful discussion about our future. That's when I realized I was done talking. She left for work shortly after, kissing my cheek with the same mechanical affection she'd been showing for months. I watched her drive away and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a strange sense of clarity that had been building for weeks. I called in sick to work. The first thing I did was check our shared laptop. I wasn't proud of it, but the constant late nights, the secretive phone calls, and the way she'd been treating me had planted seeds of suspicion that I couldn't ignore anymore. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Messages with her ex-boyfriend from college, the one she'd always claimed was just a friend. Messages that went back months, filled with complaints about me, about how boring our relationship had become, about how she was staying with me out of convenience rather than love. There were plans to meet up, photos I'd never seen, and worst of all, detailed discussions about how easy it would be to keep me in the dark while she figured out what she really wanted. But the message that broke something fundamental inside me was the one where she laughed about how predictable I was, how I'd never actually do anything even if I found out about her activities. She'd written that I was too comfortable, too dependent on her to ever make any real changes. She called me a safe backup plan. I sat there staring at the screen for what felt like hours, but according to the clock, it was only 20 minutes. The strangest part was how calm I felt. There was no dramatic revelation moment, no tears or rage. Just a cold, methodical decision forming in my mind. I went to our bedroom and pulled out the large suitcase we'd bought for our trip to Europe last year, the one where she'd spent most of the time texting someone back home instead of exploring Barcelona with me. I started packing her things carefully, methodically. Her favorite dresses, the jewelry her grandmother had left her, the books she'd been meaning to read, her expensive skincare products. Everything that was truly hers. It took most of the day. I was thorough, making sure I didn't include anything that belonged to both of us or anything I'd given her as gifts. This wasn't about being vindictive, it was about being clean. I wanted her transition out of my life to be as smooth as possible for both our sakes. I also spent time researching apartments in her price range, printing out listings and contact information. I looked up moving companies and storage facilities. I even checked her bank account balance on our shared banking app to make sure she'd have enough for deposits and first month's rent. By the time she came home around 8, I'd returned the suitcase to its usual spot in the closet and resumed my normal evening routine. I was reading on the couch when she walked in, chattering about her day, complaining about her boss, asking what was for dinner as if nothing had changed. I made pasta while she showered, and we ate together at our small dining table. She talked about her plans for the weekend, mentioning another night out with friends, another evening where I wasn't invited. She seemed almost cheerful, probably relieved that I wasn't pressing her about our morning conversation. After dinner, she settled onto the couch with her laptop while I cleaned the dishes. This was our routine, our comfortable, predictable pattern that she'd grown to despise but still relied upon. I dried the last plate and turned to face her. I told her we needed to finish our conversation from this morning. She sighed dramatically without looking up from her screen, telling me she thought we'd already covered this territory. She said she didn't understand why I always needed to analyze everything to death, why I couldn't just let things be. I explained that I'd been thinking about what she'd said, about needing space and finding our own entertainment. I told her I thought she was right, that maybe we'd grown apart more than either of us wanted to admit. She finally looked up, but her expression was more annoyed than concerned. She asked if I was really going to turn her perfectly reasonable request for some independence into another relationship crisis. She said she wasn't asking for anything dramatic, just the freedom to have her own social life, without me constantly hovering. I took a deep breath and told her that I thought maybe we wanted different things now, that perhaps we should consider whether we were still compatible as a couple. That's when she laughed. It wasn't just a chuckle or a dismissive snort. It was full-blown laughter, the kind that suggested she found my concerns genuinely amusing. She asked if I was seriously going to break up with her over her wanting to spend time with friends. She told me not to be so dramatic, that I was overreacting to everything lately. She went back to her laptop, still smiling at what she clearly considered my ridiculous behavior. She said we could talk about it later if I really needed to, but right now she had more important things to focus on. I didn't say another word. I simply walked to our bedroom closet. The suitcase was exactly where I'd left it, packed carefully with her belongings. I pulled it out and wheeled it back to the living room, setting it down gently beside the couch where she sat. The laughter died in her throat when she saw it. She stared at the suitcase for a long moment, then looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Confusion mixed with something that might have been the first genuine emotion she'd shown me in months. She asked what this was supposed to mean. I told her it meant I wasn't being dramatic. I explained that I'd spent the day packing her things because I'd realized she was right about us needing space. I said I thought it would be better if she stayed somewhere else while we both figured out what we wanted. She opened the suitcase to find her belongings neatly organized, along with the apartment listings and moving information I'd researched. Her hands shook slightly as she picked up one of the printed pages. The confidence that had carried her through months of dismissive behavior began to crumble. She asked if I was serious, if I was really doing this over something so small. Her voice was different now, smaller, without the casual cruelty that had become her default tone with me. I explained that it wasn't about one conversation or one evening. I told her I'd found the messages on our laptop, that I knew about her ex-boyfriend, about her real feelings toward our relationship. I said I understood now that she'd been staying with me out of convenience rather than love, and that I deserved better than being someone's backup plan. The tears started then, real tears that seemed to surprise her as much as they surprised me. She tried to explain, saying the messages didn't mean what I thought they meant, that she was just venting to an old friend, that everyone complains about their relationships sometimes. But I'd made my decision during those quiet hours of packing. I told her that maybe she was right about me being predictable, but that didn't mean I was stupid. I said I'd rather be alone than be with someone who saw me as boring and convenient. She begged me to reconsider, promising to change, to be better, to include me more in her social life. She said she loved me and didn't want to lose what we had together. I looked at her sitting there surrounded by the evidence of my decision, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. I told her that love shouldn't feel like such hard work for both people involved. I said that if she truly loved me, she wouldn't have spent months planning her exit strategy while pretending everything was fine. She spent the night at her sister's place, taking the suitcase and promising we'd talk more the next day when emotions weren't running so high. Update 1. She came back the following evening, calmer but still insistent that we could work things out. She'd clearly spent time preparing her arguments, explaining how the messages were taken out of context, how her relationship with her ex was purely platonic, how she'd just been going through a difficult period and handling it poorly. I listened to everything she had to say, and then I told her about the other things I discovered while she was gone. I'd continued checking our digital footprints and found dating app installations on her phone that she'd deleted but not completely erased. I'd found receipts for dinners at restaurants I'd never been to, charged to her credit card on nights she'd claimed to be working late. The elaborate explanation she'd prepared fell apart as I laid out each piece of evidence. She tried to argue that the dating apps were just for validation, that the dinners were work-related, but we both knew how hollow those explanations sounded. I told her I'd already spoken to our landlord about ending the lease early. I said I'd found a smaller apartment across town and would be moving in 2 weeks. She could keep our current place if she wanted, or find somewhere new, but I was done trying to fix something that had been broken for months. She asked where this was coming from, who this new version of me was supposed to be. She said the man she'd fallen in love with would never make such drastic decisions without trying to work things out first. I told her she was right, that the man she'd fallen in love with would have kept trying indefinitely, accepting scraps of affection and calling it a relationship. But I said that man had been slowly disappearing for months, eroded by her casual disrespect and emotional manipulation. She left again that night, and this time I didn't expect her to come back with solutions. Update 2. A week later, she made one final attempt to salvage our relationship. She'd broken things off with her ex-boyfriend, deleted all her dating apps, and even suggested couples therapy. She presented this as evidence of her commitment to making things work between us. But by then, I'd had time to think clearly about our entire 3-year history together. I realized that her recent behavior wasn't an aberration. It was an escalation of patterns that had always been there. The way she'd dismissed my concerns about her friendships with other men. The way she'd made unilateral decisions about our social life. The way she'd gradually trained me to accept less and less consideration while demanding more and more accommodation. I told her I appreciated her efforts, but that trust, once broken so completely, couldn't be rebuilt with gestures. I explained that even if she followed through on all her promises, I would spend the rest of our relationship wondering when she'd decide I was boring and predictable again. She accused me of being unforgiving, of giving up on us without really trying to work things out. She said I was throwing away 3 years over some stupid messages and a few mistakes. I told her that the messages weren't the problem. They were just the evidence that revealed the problem. I said the real issue was that she'd never respected me enough to be honest about her dissatisfaction, instead choosing to seek emotional and physical intimacy elsewhere while keeping me around for stability. She broke down completely then, admitting that she'd been confused about what she wanted, that she'd made terrible choices but didn't know how to fix them. She said she realized now how much she'd taken me for granted, how good our relationship had been before she'd started sabotaging it. I felt genuine sympathy for her in that moment. But sympathy isn't the same as forgiveness, and neither is the same as trust. I told her that recognizing her mistakes was important for her future relationships, but it couldn't undo the damage to ours. Update 3. Moving out was surprisingly liberating. My new apartment was smaller but brighter, with windows that faced east instead of the alley view we'd had together. I bought new furniture, hung pictures where I wanted them, and established routines that were entirely my own. She texted me regularly for the first month, updates about her life, attempts to maintain some kind of connection. She'd found her own place, was doing well at work, had joined a gym. She seemed to want me to know that she was becoming the person she thought I'd wanted her to be. I responded politely but briefly. I wasn't angry anymore, but I also wasn't interested in being her friend or staying updated on her progress. I'd made peace with our relationship ending and didn't want to complicate that clarity with unnecessary contact. 3 months after our breakup, she sent me a longer message explaining that she'd started therapy and was working on understanding why she'd sabotaged our relationship. She said her therapist helped her realize that she'd been afraid of real intimacy and had used conflict and deception to maintain emotional distance. She apologized for the pain she'd caused and thanked me for having the strength to end things when she couldn't. I appreciated the message but didn't respond. Her journey towards self-understanding was important, but it was hers to take, not mine to validate or participate in. 6 months later, I heard through mutual friends that she was dating someone new, someone she'd met at her gym. They seemed happy together, and I found I was genuinely glad for her. She needed to learn how to be in a relationship without the safety net of a backup plan, and apparently she was managing it. As for me, I discovered that living alone suited me better than I'd expected. I'd started hiking on weekends, taken up cooking more seriously, and rekindled friendships I'd neglected during the years I'd spent trying to make our relationship work. I wasn't actively dating yet, but I wasn't actively avoiding it either. The most surprising part of the whole experience was how little regret I felt. I'd expected to spend months second-guessing my decision, wondering if I'd given up too easily. Instead, I felt like I'd finally started living my life instead of just managing it. Looking back, I realized that her casual prediction about my predictability had been both wrong and right. I was predictable in that I'd always chosen stability over drama, accommodation over confrontation. But she'd been wrong about my capacity for change when change became necessary. The suitcase still sits in my closet, the same one I'd packed so carefully that Wednesday afternoon. I keep it there not as a reminder of what happened, but as a symbol of what's possible when you stop accepting less than you deserve. Sometimes the most dramatic thing you can do is quietly refuse to participate in your own diminishment. She was right about one thing, though. I didn't need to be dramatic to make my point. Sometimes the most powerful statement is simply walking away when walking away is the healthiest choice for everyone involved. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe.